The radio host had interviewed hundreds of musicians, but he had never seen anything like this Janis Joplin. Was mid-sentence when she simply stopped talking and started crying. And before he could figure out what to do, every single phone line in the studio lit up at once. March 4th, 1969, KSAN radio in San Francisco, one of the most influential FM radio stations in America. The kind of station that played what it wanted and said what it meant, and treated its listeners like adults who could handle the truth. Janis Joplin had agreed to the interview as a favor. She was in San Francisco for 3 days between tour dates. Her manager had arranged it. 45 minutes with host Tom Donahue. Nothing heavy, just music and touring and the new album. Janis had done dozens of these. She knew how to handle them. You showed up, you were funny and loud and slightly outrageous. You said something quotable. You left. Nobody went home changed. That was the deal. Tom Donahue was 38 years old and had been doing radio in San Francisco since the early 60s. He was a large man with a beard and a voice that sounded like it had been aged in a barrel. He was known for 2 things: his music knowledge, which was encyclopedic and genuine, and his ability to make people feel safe enough to say things they had not planned to say. That second quality was what made him dangerous, in a good way. The interview started the way these things always started. Tom asked about the tour. Janis was funny and loose and comfortable. She talked about the road and the band and the particular madness of living out of a suitcase for months at a time. She was performing the version of herself that worked in these situations, the version that gave people what they came for without giving them anything real. Then Tom asked a question that was not on anyone's list. He asked it quietly, almost offhandedly, as if it had just occurred to him. He said, "Do you ever get lonely out there?" Janis opened her mouth to answer. She had an answer ready. She always had an answer ready for questions like that. Something about the band being her family, something about the crowd filling every empty space, something true enough to satisfy and vague enough to protect. But the answer did not come out. What came out instead was silence. 15 seconds of silence on live radio, which is a very long time. Tom did not fill it. He had the instinct to leave it alone, to let whatever was happening, happen. Janis looked down at the table between them. She looked at her hands. She looked at the microphone. And then Janis Joplin started crying on live radio in San Francisco in front of however many thousands of people were listening at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Not delicately, not apologetically, the way a person cries when they have been not crying for a very long time and something small finally opens the door. Her shoulders came forward. Her breath went ragged. She pressed her hand over her mouth the way people do when they are trying to hold something in and have already lost. Tom Donahue sat very still. He did not reach for the console. He did not signal the producer. He did not cut to music or commercial or anything. He just sat there and let Janis Joplin cry on his radio station for as long as she needed to. In the production booth behind the glass, the producer stood with his hand over the delay button. He did not press it. Something stopped him. Maybe it was the sound of it, the specific sound of something real happening on a medium that had heard so little that was real. Maybe it was the phone lines, because the phone lines had started lighting up, all of them, simultaneously. Within 30 seconds of Janis starting to cry, every incoming line at KSAN was lit. The producer stared at the board. He had never seen all lines light at once outside of a news emergency. This was not a news emergency. This was a woman crying, and thousands of people were calling in. Back in the studio, Tom leaned slightly toward his microphone. He did not ask Janis if she was okay. He did not apologize for the question. He just said, "You do not have to answer that. You do not have to answer anything tonight." Janis laughed through the crying, the specific laugh that comes when something is too true to be only sad. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked up at Tom. She said, "Nobody ever asks that." He said, "I know." She said, "They ask about the music and the band and the next album and the tour. Nobody ever just asks if I am lonely." Tom said, "Are you?" Janis looked at the microphone for a long moment. Then she said, "Yes." She said yes in a way that was not a performance and not an interview answer and not the Janis Joplin that filled arenas and drank Southern Comfort on stage and howled at the ceiling until the room shook. She said yes the way a person says it when they have been waiting a long time for someone to ask. She said she was lonely in the specific way that famous people are lonely, which is the worst kind, she said, because you are surrounded by people every hour of every day, and the loneliness does not care. It just sits in the middle of all those people and waits. She said she could walk off a stage where 10,000 people had just screamed her name and feel it, waiting in the wings, patient and quiet, and completely indifferent to how many people thought they loved her. She said the road made it worse, because on the road you were never in one place long enough to be known. You were just Janis Joplin everywhere you went. And Janis Joplin was not lonely. Janis Joplin was a force of nature. But she was not always Janis Joplin. Sometimes she was just a woman from Port Arthur, Texas, who did not know how to be still, who had never learned how to let people close enough to help with the weight of it. Tom listened. He did not interrupt. He did not redirect. He let her say all of it. In the production booth, the producer had stopped watching the phone lines because there was nothing to do about them. They were all lit. They had been lit for 15 minutes. He had never seen anything like it. Calls were coming in from across the city, from across the state. People who had pulled over their cars to call. People calling from payphones. People calling from their kitchens at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. All of them waiting. All of them wanting to say something to the woman crying on the radio. After a while, Tom looked at his producer through the glass. The producer held up the phone lines. All of them. Tom nodded slowly. He turned back to Janis. He said, "There are a few people who want to talk to you." Janis looked at him. He said, "A few hundred, actually." Janis said, what Tom said. "Every line we have. They have been calling since you started talking." Janis stared at him. He said, "Do you want to hear what they have to say?" Janis was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Yes." Tom opened the first line. A woman's voice came through. She sounded like she was in her 50s. She said, "I just want her to know that I heard her." She said, "I heard what she said about the loneliness." She said, "I have felt that my whole life, and I never heard anyone say it out loud before." She said, "I just wanted her to know she is not the only one." Tom thanked her and opened the next line. A man this time, young-sounding. He said he had driven to a payphone 3 blocks from his apartment to call. He said he did not have anything important to say. He just did not want her to be sitting in that studio thinking nobody was listening. He said someone was listening. Tom opened line after line. A teacher from Oakland who said she played Janis's music to her students when they were struggling. A Vietnam veteran who said ball and chain was the only thing that got him through certain nights he did not want to describe. A teenage girl who said she had been told her whole life that girls who felt things too loudly were too much, and that hearing Janis Joplin had been the first time she thought maybe too much was exactly enough. A man who said simply, "Tell her thank you. Tell her we are all out here. Tell her she is not alone." Janis sat in that studio for 20 minutes listening to strangers call a radio station to talk to her. Not about the music, not about the albums or the tour or the next performance, about the loneliness, about the things she had accidentally said out loud on live radio at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, about the realest thing she had said in public in years. By the end, she had stopped crying, not because she had resolved anything, not because the loneliness had lifted, but because something had shifted in the room, something small and significant. She had said a true thing, and the true thing had traveled through a microphone and across a city and into cars pulled over on the side of roads and kitchens and payphones. And all those people had called back to say, "We heard you. We are here. You are not alone out there." When the show ended, Tom walked Janis to the door of the station. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the San Francisco night. Janis said, "I did not mean to do that." Tom said, "I know." She said, "I do not usually do that." He said, "I know that too." She looked at the street for a moment. Then she said, "Do you think they meant it?" Tom said, "Every one of them." Janis nodded slowly. She put her round, tinted glasses back on. She turned up the collar of her coat against the March air. She said good night. She walked away down the street, into the city that had made her and unmade her, and made her again more times than she could count. Tom Donahue stood on the sidewalk and watched her go. He said later that it was the best radio he ever made. Not because of anything he had done, but because he had asked one question and then been quiet enough to let the answer come. The KSAN broadcast from March 4th, 1969, was never officially archived. The tape was recorded, but never released. It exists in a private collection. People who heard it that night remember it the way you remember things that happened to you, rather than things you witnessed. Janis Joplin died 19 months after that broadcast. She was 27 years old. She died alone in a hotel room in Hollywood. The coroner's report noted the time, and Tom Donahue, sitting in his kitchen in San Francisco reading the news, thought about a Tuesday night in March and a woman who had asked if the people calling in had meant it. And he thought, they meant it. Janis. Every single one of them meant it. You just did not get enough time to believe it.